Thank you, everybody, for making some time to join us. I see many folks who came to the last one, so I'm happy to see you again. I think, Anna, I don't believe you joined us at our first meeting of the work group, so welcome. Thanks for coming. And Molly, were you at the last one? I think you were. No, you were not. It was another council meeting that I may have seen you at. Thank you for coming too. So yeah, we should probably do quick intros. We did really long intros last time, but for the folks who are not here, would you please, we'll let you start, just introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and if you would share a little bit about just your interest in the strategic planning or any strategic planning interests or experiences that you want to talk about. I will go ahead and invite Anna to start, and then Molly and anyone else who didn't come last time, please.
Thanks, Cord. My name is Anna Williams. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the executive director of the System of Care Advisory Council. We are a 25-member governor-appointed body that works to coordinate and improve outcomes for the state systems that provide care to children. We are lucky enough to have Brian in a lot of our spaces, and we are embarking on our very own strategic planning process, which will conclude in January of 2026. And so I'm really interested in watching what you're all doing and thinking about how we can align and amplify the work that Youth Development Division is doing with the work that the System of Care is doing.
Awesome, thank you. Molly and Abe, you were not here last time either, so after Molly, would you please also do an intro?
Molly Rogers, and in my paid work, I work as the Wasco County Department of Youth Services Director in the Dalles, Oregon. I also am a member of the Youth Development Council and chair the Juvenile Justice Subcommittee, which is the advisory, it's kind of the sub-advisory to the Youth Development Council on juvenile justice issues for OJJDP, which we act as the SAG, the full council acts as the SAG, which is a state advisory group for the title funds that Oregon receives through the OJJDP. My passion and have participated with Youth Development Council around the strategic planning is really, while there's a big system to look at, I really bring the perspective of the juvenile justice, delinquency, and youth who are identified at risk of either entering that system or the dependency system. And so years and years of advocating for that marginalized and underserved population. That's who I am.
Hello, I'm Abraham Magaña, he, him, él pronouns. I'm a grant manager and operations analyst. I've been with YDO. I think this is going to be my 11th year or 12th year with YDO. So I kind of have that historical context and some of the familiarity with kind of the going through the motions of strategic plans in the past, and just grant management experience, and just knowing some of the challenges in the day-to-day with some of our nonprofits and the programs of that nature. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you. I'll do a very quick one and then pass it around to the other folks. Cord Bucher, the Deputy Director for the Youth Development Division and Youth Development Oregon. And I'll pass it over. I should also say that for this work group, I'm the staff person helping to carry this work group forward. Something we talked about last time is work groups are a little bit different from our council committees. A council committee would have a council member chair or co-chairs, whereas this is a little bit less formal. So I'm going to keep the work group moving forward, but we invite anyone from the council to participate. And of course, we also appreciate those of you from the division and other folks from other agencies and other places who've come to join us and support this work. So again, Cord Bucher, Deputy Director, YDO. I'll pass it to Brian.
All right, unmuted. Yes, Brian Detman, Youth Development Oregon, Youth Development Director. Really appreciate everybody being here. I'll pass it to Juliet so we can keep moving.
Hi, I'm Juliet Mackin from NPC Research, work with programs related to the evaluation. So specifically, I work with juvenile crime prevention evaluation and some other supports for the YDD. How about Parasa?
Thank you so much, Juliet. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Parasa Chan Rami. I use she, her pronouns. I serve on the Youth Development Council. And then in my other work, I'm also the legislative director for the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators. I'm going to pass it to Wes.
Hi, everybody. West Rivers, he, him pronouns. I am a senior policy analyst with the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. Beth.
I am Bethany Tramer. I'm a newish director for Oregon Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, and came from a decade at Oregon Ask, so statewide nonprofit community-based organizations. And Melissa, I think you're all that's left.
Thanks, Bethany. Melissa Gallardo, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the executive support specialist for YDO. Thanks.
All right, then. Thanks everybody for that. So let me just do a quick check on this, on the how best we should do the slides. Brian, you suggested sharing the actual PowerPoint as an attachment. Do you mean to just email it out right now, or just
Can you drop it into the chat?
I have a link. There's a link to the PowerPoint anyone can access.
Oh, can anybody get it? If everybody got it, then
It should be
great.
an anyone link. I'm finally, after years on Teams, pulling the right one up. So good. Excellent. Thanks, Anna. So I'm going to just quickly, for the folks who are not here, talk about what we talked about last time we met. And that'll lead us into where we finished off in the last conversation, which was around just the prioritization of the ideas that we generated in our strategic planning retreat back in the fall, and how we start to turn the copious amount of ideas and priorities into something we can work with. And then and kind of talking about this following the last meeting, Brian had some really great suggestions about how we might also bring to the group some frameworks from our 2021 strategic plan that might be useful in how we think about trying to categorize and streamline all the stuff that we have brewing for this next plan. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the last meeting, for those of you who missed it, the first part of it was just to talk about the purpose and goals of this work group. And just really briefly, the strategic planning work that the Youth Development Council and Division have underway. We started back in the fall, in November of 2023, with a retreat. We've done some work, staff has done some work to take that information, we've shared that out. In this slide deck, actually, you can go to the end of the slides. There is a slide that has links to a few different documents. There's a link to a summary from that retreat. There's a link to our previous plan and some other background documents. We'll keep putting that in the slides so that it's handy. And so what we wanted to do with this group was, we have the council has an important role in the strategic plan and ultimately adopting it. And we talked about whether a council committee would be the right place to keep the work moving forward. But within our bylaws, we have the ability to establish a work group, which is a little less formal than a committee. It is something that the staff can lead, but involve both staff, council, and other stakeholders in to work on this, and then develop things further, and then bring it back to the council. We are going to be meeting, we're trying to meet about every 2 weeks for a little while to get make some progress on what a draft strategic plan might look like. We've got a lot of ideas, and we're trying to whittle that down into something that we can then bring to the council to get some feedback and continue refining that, bring it to community and get some input and engagement around that. So this is just the first step in developing a strategic plan. Our goal is to finish that work by the end of this calendar year. We'd like to have a plan done for the council to adopt by December 2024. And so a fairly tight deadline, even that seems like a long time, as folks probably realize with this stuff, it goes really quickly. And in the first meeting, we did talk a little bit about our last strategic plan. We're going to talk a little bit more about it today, touch on some different parts of that. But what we got into conversation about was prioritization of what we generated at the retreat, and that's where we're going to pick up today. I will stop there. And is there anything anyone wants to just make sure we highlight from the last discussion that I may have overlooked or missed? And if that is a fair assessment, we'll just keep moving. Cool. So one of the things that we shared in the last conversation was, what are the ways that we might prioritize what we've got? For those of you who've looked at the retreat, we've got about 8 different bodies of work, categories of work that the division and council do. Each of those has a whole lot of different ideas, priorities, things that we might try to accomplish. And we feel like the next step is to try to refine that into something a bit more streamlined, manageable, and focused. We talked about some of the ways we might try to prioritize what we've got, looking at the time frame, looking at what will have the most impact, looking at the viability or practicality of all the ideas we generated. We also talked a bit about how and where we apply the YDO equity framework that was developed by the Council's Equity and Disparity Committee, and applying the questions that we developed for Equity Lens. But something that came up at the end of the meeting was a suggestion to, as we're looking at these categories, and there is a slide that has the categories of work. There were 8 different bodies of work that we came up with, trying to consolidate ideas from the retreat. And there was a question about whether we try to hone in on a couple of areas that we identified and build a plan around a more constrained set of priorities, or do we look at the whole plan, or the whole set of ideas rather, and select ideas from each category to elevate and to try to refine a smaller set of ideas into some strategies for the plan. And then following the meeting, we had more discussion, and something that we've talked about a bit, but we haven't brought back to the council or to this group, was the way that we actually structured our last strategic plan. So our plan in 2021 there were 3 overarching goals that essentially everything that we came up with files into one of these 3 goals. And there were also something that it's filtered into a few different places within our work. It's mentioned on like page 14 of the last plan. It was something that we had developed when we were trying to define what we do with our grants. And these 5 approaches or potentially strategies that we have for our work. And so we're going to share those with you today. We want to make sure that folks have seen these and think about how they might potentially be ways to be applicable to what we have right now. Brian, if you want to add anything to that, since I think this is very much an idea that you've kind of helped me to cultivate, I want to give you a chance to talk about it a bit. And we can also jump to the next slide and we'll put the goals up on the screen.
Yeah, Cord. Yeah. And I think we've got some questions that we're going to ask. So want to encourage some conversation, but it seemed like as Cord and I were debriefing the last meeting and kind of ended, like we had our planning retreat. We came up with some real ideas. Cord and staff, right, reduced or tried to consolidate those into some major themes. One of the things that we told our council and staff in that planning retreat was that we try to use these overarching goals in this new plan. Just they felt, oh, thanks, Melissa, for dropping the link to the plan. They felt, I don't know, the important. I think we had some agreement from the last plan around these ideas. So we didn't think that we necessarily needed to reinvent these ideas. But there's a lot of words, maybe even some jargon, like, wow, driving systems coordination, system change. Like there's a lot of words in there, and maybe it could be that either this could be refined or simplified. And so I felt like we wanted to put these in front of you. And then the thing that we'll see here in a second is the kind of these approaches. And they are even feel more sort of distilled and focused, and I think they point towards a sort of impact that we want to create in the world of youth development that I really like. And it felt like there was something in between from our last work group meeting and I think Annalise from ADPC from the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission kind of mentioned this, like, hey, a lot of these themes seem to be more like strategies. And it felt to me like there was something in between the mission, vision, goals, and then the strategies or the themes that could be like re-articulated as strategies. There was something kind of in the middle missing. So we felt like spending some time today to look at these overarching goals. The next slide, I think, has the kind of approaches and having some conversation, because I think if we can kind of fill that in, it will then help us make some of those choices around priorities and how to make better sense of the categories, themes, and then all the underneath stuff. So thanks, Cord. You're muted, Cord.
Thank you, Brian. The one other thing I might mention about the 3 goals before we go into the next slide is that, when we were trying to really figure out like what are the overarching concepts in the last plan, there's a lot of words here, but I think a simpler way to think about it is maybe the first one, systems alignment and transformation, is really focused on our agency and how it aligns with other state agencies and other entities like us. Youth voice and resilience is really where the strategies and actions were really focused on young people specifically. What are we doing with youth, whether it's youth on our council or the youth that we serve? And the last one is maybe more focused on how we're working with the individuals or the organizations that we fund in the community. That's not a strict way of thinking about it, but that is one kind of common theme among the actions there. And Molly, please go ahead.
Okay, so I've been around a long time and I'm not shy, so here we go. These scream to me as red flags for the legislature to say, what are you doing? Because they don't, if these are our goals, and I was a participant in the planning session, and I appreciate all the beautiful words up there, but we need to be able to have some sort of capacity to measure and make our story that system alignment and transformation. The question is what? Driving systems coordination. How will you know we've done that? How to system change through agency accountability and transparency. How do we know to do that, and how do we walk towards that? So really, I think systems alignment and transformation is absolutely a great statement. I like that part. But then underneath it, we need to be able to say, working with 3 partner agencies or councils, or developing. So on our approaches, one is identify and remove system barrier gaps. I happen to know that System of Care has that as one of their goals, is to remove barriers and system gaps. So systems alignment and transformation seems and feels like the overarching goal needs to be identifying other youth serving policy agencies and having joint meetings to assure. I mean, do you see where I'm going with it?
I do. No, that's helpful. I mean, I think to some extent we tried to unpack that stuff in the actions, but I think that is a really useful critique of these, is that at a high level, they don't tell you what success looks like, and they don't tell you what even action looks like. And that I think is a fair thing to want to improve about these statements. It also might be that I think what is useful about the next slide, and this was something that kind of got buried within the strategic plan, but if you want to go to the next slide, Melissa, these we'll just share up on the screen too. These were things that we actually came up with when we were trying to define what our grants are meant to do. I think with these as well, I think the same clarifying what some of these words actually mean we do, and what we would do to measure success is still important. But as we were talking, Brian and I, about this did seem like these were also some interesting ways of thinking about the work that we wanted to share with the group. And Parasa, I see your hand is up, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just to build off of what you shared, Cord, as I was looking at the slide, I also pulled up the document in the chat where it outlines the strategies and actions. And when you brought up like how are we measuring that progress, that's what came to mind for me of what's our implementation evidence, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, from the last strategic plan, especially as we reflect on some of the major themes that came out of the retreat. There is a lot of overlap. And so I'm thinking like potentially an area where we have some deeper conversation as part of this planning is like, how do we know that we've made progress in a particular area within our set time frame of the strategic plan? And keep that in mind as we go into this next phase. And then the other thing I was reflecting on from some of our retreat conversations and planning conversations is in thinking about where there's alignment with other partners, being able to name that as part of our strategic plan to show where there's sort of that Venn diagram of overlap on the youth that we're serving. So I think that could be really helpful too, to showcase that we're not carrying the water on this one thing by ourselves, but how do we do that in partnership with key system partners? And what does that look like? And I think there could potentially be a need for some sort of like cross collaborative conversations, kind of like what's happening here. But that's something else that came to mind for me as I'm looking at our strategic plan from 2021, 24, and then as we make this transition to our next iteration of our strategic plan.
Yeah, thank you. I maybe will ask Wes a question because we were just in talking about this, looking at the ADPC strategic plan, which has a interesting way of talking about the other agencies that have roles within the plan. And we met, I guess, a couple of months ago with Annalise about this. And it seemed like I'm kind of curious, like what the thinking was in terms of how you or how ADPC sort of built in these ways of ensuring that where the strategic plan addresses work that is carried out by other agencies, like how you thought about that and how you planned for the collaboration necessary to move that forward. I don't know if Wes, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think our statutory language is pretty clear, although you could also drive a bus through it. So in terms of creating more efficient systems and more efficient and effective systems for substance use disorder. And I think that it's hard to draw parallels with the original intent of ADPC's strategic plan, given all of the noise, like not noise, but it was created at the beginning of a pandemic. There was a lot happening. So I think we're starting to rebuild and rethink through what it looks like and what it means to create partnership and do the work in partnership with other agencies. I think the strategy of and I still think that's happening even in the meetings where we're all coming together as agencies and we're discussing who is responsible for what. At first, it was really, let's get everything out that our agency is doing in a given sector and put it on paper. And I think that speaks to the length of the ADCC strategic plan and the number of variables that are there. I think as we look forward, I think our commission is very much interested in tightening that up, into creating more of a structure in which we are providing some foundational values that then interrelate with the exact goal that we want to see. And I think that's going to look different. So Cord, I'm sorry, this is kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. I think it's going to look a little different than how we have it set up now. Although I think the the partnership that we have created in bringing agency representatives together to have these kind of quarterly conversations, I think that's a really interesting model, and one that might provide more of an input system in kind of narrowing these goals as you go forward.
Got it. No, that's helpful. Thank you. Brian, I just saw a comment pop up in the chat.
Yeah, Cord, can you
Say more about that. I can hear you.
Yeah, good. I thought maybe you got cut off, and I
I
wanted
was
to
just reading it and I was like, I'd like to hear more about this.
we have different statutes to drive our work. We have a very specific set of responsibilities as it relates to juvenile justice and our role at the more federal level, to the point that Molly pointed out, that requires that our councils act as the state advisory group around the Title II dollars, which are federal dollars. But all of that, still, I wonder, given the kind of, and maybe it's around elements of the plan, right? The systems alignment and change stuff. But I wonder if structurally there's some things that we can I agree on, perhaps, that, and or maybe it's just, I guess, a section of our plan that really speaks to this sort of coordination and overlap between systems. So yeah, Cord, I'm just kind of thinking out loud about how the reason we invited Anna is here. We appreciate that, and we're in conversations with some of her, Christy from her team, and Wes, really appreciate your being here. We've been in conversation with Annalise and Tori. Like, there's just like these state bodies like we are that are charged with filling in gaps and coordinating. We're not doing direct service per se, and we're doing policy and grants and funding primarily. And yet again, we do have specific responsibilities around juvenile justice, monitoring facilities, and actually approving some more programmatic things. Yeah, just excited about maybe maybe it's not in the work group space here, but we could like figure out ways that, as we're all working on a strategic plan, where there structurally we can agree on, if you will, some framework or something. So that's my thought. Anna, I see your hand. Molly, see yours. So I don't know who's first, but maybe Anna, I think I saw yours first.
First of all, I love your thought. I was thinking down a very similar path. I think it would be really helpful to think about where we can, all the way back to Molly's comment before, but like, how do we know if it's doing anything, right? If we could align on some outcomes measures, perhaps, that if there's something that we're looking at, if we're doing our job and you're doing your job and ADPC is doing their job, that people will see something different in their lives. What is that thing, right? And how can we all be looking at that? That same measure. I'll drop into our chat. I'm not trying to be like self-promoting, but we put together this data report that's looking at administrative data that already exists for the children's system and trying to track trends in it to see if we can actually measure the impact of our work. If there's something in there that feels like the right thing that all of us could be looking at, that might be one way to build alignment. And then the other thing that I really, really want to see in our strategic plan, and I would love to see it in the other two that we sort of are discussing here as well, is a graphic that shows people when they should expect a change in their lives. That, like, I think that is true accountability when we say, like, we're planning and we're having conversations and we're investing and we're doing all these things, and people are like, cool, nothing is changing, right? So if we can say, like, May of 2026, you should see something different in your life, and folks can know that, then they can reach out to us in May if nothing has changed, or August if nothing has changed, and we can start adapting and adjusting our strategies. That feels like a lot more accountability than us pointing at agencies and saying, like, you need to do your jobs. I don't know that has proven especially effective. So those are my thoughts, Brian, in answer to your question.
Molly, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, yay. I think, Anna, you're spot on. I think from the local level and the serving of the communities, if there's common communication and some knowledge at the state level, that there's collaboration happening, I think would be amazing. And also really, I think there might be something in between goals and approaches. And I think maybe potentially looking at some of the other plans on how they've lined those out. Because I do think there's something separate in between those two. And the measurable piece, I think, is really critical. The time-bound piece is also very critical. And you asked the question, Cord, and in our approaches, they don't tie to our goals as much. In the fact that in our approaches, we talk about re-engage, and advanced youth learners, but I'm not sure what that means in relationship to youth voice and resiliency in amplifying youth voices. So two things. One is I think there is something in between that we need to create. And two, you asked the question, and I don't think the approach is attached to the goals. I think they're almost completely different ideas.
No, that's all really helpful. I mean, I think that the thing that has, as I was reading the approaches again, I'd kind of forgotten about this, but to some extent, these have been used in the recent update to our statutes in some of the language that seemed a bit like unclear, outdated. Some of this is actually, I mean, like we didn't need to talk about re-engagement because we already have a section focused on our re-engagement work, but reducing disparities and preventing and disrupting youth violence and building protective factors, things like that, is now actually what we are to do, by statute. Those are things that are now kind of embedded there. So this does actually tie more to the actual work we are supposed to do as a council and division, where I think that the goals were sort of trying to distill a bunch of stuff into things that were thematically connected, but maybe don't really have the same motion. No, that's all really helpful. I mean, only because I have not as much familiarity with the system of care plan and work. I was looking at the ADPC plan, and I saw there that the way that you talked about, this was something I think you touched on just now, Molly, like in the ADPC plan, there are impacts and outcomes. And the way I read it was that the impacts are the data that you will use to measure change for the state that shows that what you're doing is working. And the outcomes are the work you will do that should make those changes. And that's what you can measure your work towards the outcomes, and the impacts should be the result of your outcomes being executed. Am I understanding the sort of way that you're identifying those things correctly, Wes?
Roughly, yeah. I mean, I think so I do think it is important on top of like to Anna's point of having some measurable impact through data systems. I think especially with respect to the leadership realm of outcomes, like we're all coming together. We call it leadership in our strategic plan, but it is effectively joint communication and collaboration with state agencies, that there is some thematic or qualitative measurement along the way that is picking up and documenting that system of support for each other. Because I don't know if you can really measure that. Like that, I know who my partners are, and I know who my good partners are, right? Like, and I'm just thinking, like, just kind of broadly putting that down on paper in terms of like how you measure that, and like working with like qualitative researchers to kind of figure that out as like documenting that. I think that's something that we're thinking about internally, because as you'll see in the like our quarterly report, a lot of that is a little mushy, right? Like a lot of our progress in that area is a little bit harder to define because some of those outcomes, they're subjective. And so really thinking about how we can kind of qualitatively package that up and show joint collective impact across the agencies in our collaborative efforts, I think that's really important.
Thank you.
Wes, do you think that, and not to put you on the spot, do you think that is you're working on a new plan, and maybe it's just hard to say or not, you can't say, will have a similar structure. And I say that having, attended like one of the last ADPC meetings, and I think, yeah, I think, we worked with a consultant in our, as sort of as a part of our last process, and you kind of get pushed towards things, and you go, okay, yeah, we'll hope that works. So I don't know, not to put you on the spot, Wes, but do you think that structure will remain the same, and it served you well, or might you is now, are you think, is you and Annalise and Tori and others, as you think about it, and as your commission, yeah, maybe we're going in a different direction?
So great question. I think we're a little early in the conversation to kind of say, I think that I don't want to speak on behalf of the commissioners. I think that the early conversations point to we will take a little bit of a different approach. I don't know how different it will be, but like I think I could foresee a narrowing or concentration of scope a little bit more, just based on the conversations that we've had initially. This is a brand new group of commissioners, so we're still trying to figure that out. And I also think it depends on these partnerships, right? So like we want alignment with you all, with SOCAC, and we're having those conversations as well. So I think there are a lot of inputs that are kind of suggesting that it might be a little bit of a different tact. I hope that's helpful, Brian.
Yeah, it is. Thanks.
Bethany, I want to jump back to the comment you made a little while ago in the chat, just to make sure that I understand it, that you said this is one of the ways to prioritize actions, is to look at where there is synergy that we want to elevate based on collective capacity. So is that to just essentially, am I understanding that as like another way we might look at our priorities is like, where are we doing work that intersects with other agencies where there's going to be magnified impact because we can be working towards a collective goal? And are those things we should elevate?
Yeah. So I guess I was going back to like the original question on how we want to, pull out priorities from this conversation. And I love the pieces I love the visual of a Venn diagram and trying to think of how all of these strategic plans are overlapping for this support of youth and families and communities in the middle. And so I think, without getting too deep into what that could look like, I think this strategic work group would be a perfect place to see what strategies or what items on that strategic planning list resonate with work that's happening on systems of care. And so we can have some, like a column of prioritization saying this is work that aligns, making sure that all of the partners and not just youth development council members would get to go through and read that list as well, right? And so they get to provide feedback additionally on how these items line up with what work they're doing, to say, I hope you prioritize this because we're doing the same kind of thing. Might be a nice way to call out the, how likely is it to happen if there's 3 different agencies working towards the same goal. And then kind of in a similar vein, I guess, going back to the goals, and certainly appreciate feedback that they're not really strong statements of like, oh, I really feel like this is what we want to see happen. But the categories make sense. Like you do want systems alignment and transformation, and the categories that came up from the strategic planning in the fall kind of fit within there. And you can use the statements that are describing those categories, saying we will be building systems alignment and transformation by deepening collaboration across state agencies and communities. And then you build into the priority action items that are under that goal. Feels like because it feels like that's kind of what you've already done, is you've picked out categories that fall within some of those bigger goals. And so then you're just filling in the thing that's going to happen. You're going to deepen relationships. You're going to support youth resilience by these categories of work you've already said.
Yeah, I feel like if you want to, maybe Melissa, can you jump to maybe go 2 slides? Because I want to get, just particularly for folks that hadn't seen these as much. These are the categories that we have. We took there was well over 100, but we tried to whittle down some of the ideas and priorities that came up in our retreat. And then I tried to kind of cluster them into similar areas or bodies of work. These are very abbreviated. One that wasn't that clear is youth needs, and that was really where there were a lot of ideas around youth experiencing homelessness, youth in the justice system, and youth in the foster care system, and how we serve those young people. So it was, I think the full title of that one was meeting or addressing youth's deepest needs. The others are probably more self-explanatory in terms of what kinds of work they embody. But these are the 8 categories that we had, just for folks to see that. I see. I see your comment here, Molly. Oh no, are you leaving?
I have YDC staff here working on our compliance monitoring for our core strategies for OJDDP, so I have to go. But anyway,
Oh,
let me
I can't
know.
sign it and just say it's good. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't have the power. I don't have the
Thanks,
juice.
Molly.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun. I love this kind of like, it's super aspirational. I love that part, and we have to figure out how to measure it.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Molly.
Cord, I'd just jump in. Wes, I do appreciate, and maybe this is building a little on Beth, and it's Wes said something in here about maybe those, not this section, Melissa, I know you're showing us the work categories, but the system alignment, community, the capacity and justice, and then they feel a bit like values. And Molly suggested, maybe use those, use them in some way, weave them in, but they're kind of they're kind of values. And so maybe there's something we can think, and but to think about using them as a prioritization tool is an interesting, idea. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that, Brian, and thanks, Anna, for that comment. Yeah, I think that what I think we were trying to do in putting all this in front of you is figuring out what these things are. It's like we've kind of got like a bunch of like unidentified creatures, and I'm like, what is this? And I think that, like, is it a goal? Is it a strategy? Is it a value? Is kind of a thing we're struggling with a little bit with all this stuff. So that's kind of helpful to start to say, well, what do these words do for us? And I think that's right, Brian, that, like, to me, the 3, what we were calling goals, are really like these almost like intentions that animate a bunch of the work. Like, there are a lot of actions that could help to drive system alignment or build community capacity. But it's a long way down to actually getting to the things that we would be measuring. And then I think maybe this would be a good point to throw up the questions that I think are probably 2 slides forward from here, Melissa, which was, I mean, we've kind of addressed some of these, but this is really what we were kind of coming in hoping to try to tackle, and which I think everybody has intuited and just jumped right in to do. I mean, as Molly said, the 3 goals of the 5 approaches may not connect, but I think that they don't need to, and I think that maybe they do offer different things. But maybe there is use in both, is the sense that I'm getting from folks, that there's some value in finding ways to attach it to what we're doing in the next plan. Anna, please go ahead.
Thanks. I think when you even just change the word on 3 overarching goals to, Cord, when you're talking more about values, I think then the 2, the 3 and the 5, they connect more for me. When I'm looking at the 5, where are they? Like engage, re-engage, and advance youth learners. For me, that looks like youth voice and resilience and community capacity and justice, right? And so like, I think if we're trying to say like, these are goals and then these are action steps that we're going to take to get there, it doesn't feel as accurate but to say like, these are the themes or the values, or sort of the overarching, I mean, I get themes or values really are the right words in my head, that then they apply to a lot of the activities or the approaches, right? And so it does make it all make a lot more sense in my head. I think the word goals felt is where it got hung up.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And they are I mean, the 5 approaches are not that jargony, but the 3 overarching goals, I mean, it is jargon, and there's a reason why people land on certain types of jargon, right? Like system change through agency, accountability, and transparency. Like that's a phrase, maybe you don't all hear that every day in your work, but like I hear that 100 times a day, right? And so it may mean different things. Back to the conversation that Brian and I had in our state agency standing committee a few days ago, right? Like that it may mean different things to different people. And so thinking about who your audience is here, are you trying to drive behavior for agency partners and people who are paying for the work, or are you trying to drive engagement from youth? I don't think youth are ever going to connect with a phrase like systems change through agency accountability.
No, probably not. And this was, it's unfortunate that Marcella is not here today, because I think she was, I think addressing this question of like, if we wanted this document or some version of it to be meaningful to young people, it would probably need to look a lot different. And who the audience is kind of an important factor there. Yeah, I I was just visiting with family and telling them about how I do systems change, and they all just kind of nodded along, like, yeah, sure, okay, cool. It's not that easy to explain sometimes or meaningful for them.
I've got a question here because I love that this was brought up earlier. Because SMART goals are measurable and the themes are great. Is there an intention that the work group would put measurables to any part of this, or is that something that just is going back to the council on whatever the work group does produce?
I mean, I think there's openness about that. I mean, I think that really it's just the goal is just to kind of have a space where we can work through this stuff. And I think that I do feel like the previous plan, that's where we really got stalled out, to be honest. I think that we had a lot of good intentions and ideas, and we did the work, and in a lot of cases we achieved what we set out to do. But other than knowing that we achieved it, we didn't really have a lot of metrics. And metrics are a big challenge for us for a few different reasons. But actually prioritizing the measurables in this strategic planning process is probably something we do want to do. I think that can happen in the work group, but probably also extends beyond it. I mean, I feel like once we get to the point where we want to engage other stakeholders, grantees, et cetera, about this, there's a whole other conversation about how they would see us being successful and what success looks like to them versus to us. But I think we can start that here.
I agree with you, Cord. I think, and if I'm the takeaway from this is that real need to start to develop things that are more measurable, like to take these ideas and say, okay, so what is measurable? And now that may be quantifiable, qualifiable, or time bound, right? It doesn't have to be like, and there's a tension for us as a like, among other things, kind of policy making body and grant maker. Like our ability to drive like actual like reductions in disparities, let's just say, feel like we're like a couple steps removed. That's not to say that we wouldn't want to aim towards that, but and from a youth or family perspective or others, they might be like, I don't know where you are in the process, but yeah, impacting the disparate either treatment or outcomes for youth of color and juvenile justice. Now, they might not articulate it quite in the words that I just used, but yes, yeah, would love for you to do something about that, right? And you know, Anna, we've been in conversation around birth to prison pipeline conversation. Like I feel like the voice of many of the system of care advisory council members are saying, this is we need to do something about that. our babies are, you know, are going to the outcomes for them it's unacceptable, and you just this state body or that state body, you have a responsibility. These deliver on this, like, and I can tell you, Court and I could spend a lot of time telling you, like, we've achieved a lot of things in our strategic plan that were probably more like deliverables, like, or more like, yeah, we wanted to honor tribal sovereignty in some more meaningful ways, and that we've made some real strides in that, and that is, but I won't spend time right now. Like, yeah, it means taking certain language out of certain documents, and that's not to be, I'm not underplaying it. Like, it's impactful, but there's like some administrative stuff that is also important as in policy stuff, and there's programmatic outcomes too that our communities want. So finding the balance is an interesting dance for us. Parsa.
Yeah, to build off of that, Brian, I'm reflecting on sort of the value of having multiple measures to kind of track our progress over time and whether or not we reach the goal, where we might be coming up short or where we have areas of improvement, right? The other thing that I was thinking about, perhaps this is more of a long-term idea, would be is when there's overlap with other agencies or departments in the youth we're serving or the grantees we're working with, right? I wonder if there's a way to streamline like what we ask of them in terms of measuring progress. Because I also think about like our districts, our community-based organizations that are applying for multiple grant opportunities and the volume of data collection that comes along with that. On the user end, it can feel very overwhelming depending on your staff capacity. And I wonder if there's some synergy we can build over time of like, here's the shared data set we're looking for across these entities, so that instead of having to fill it out 3 or 4 different times, you're filling out like once or twice, and how it ties with our broader state vision and strategic plan, you know, for X effort, B, Y, you know, fill in the blank, right? So it's just something I was thinking about as a consideration for us as we go through this planning process together. Because there could be some additional opportunities to grow, to ensure there's coherence and clarity, and just to be mindful of what we're asking for folks and the timing of that. That town-bound piece is, I think, really important to consider too.
You know, just on that, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think that, so ODE has a pretty significant effort around trying to reduce the reporting burden for districts. That we are, you know, engaged with that work, although it hasn't had a lot of impact on what we do, because although we do fund a few schools or districts or entities that are reporting. Oh, and I got a text, which I looked at the clock and I figured it might be about that. We're kind of connected to that grant consolidation work. But what I'm thinking about is like, we probably have more in common among who we fund with other agencies besides ODE. So I'm hearing you saying this about system of care, about ADPC. I mean, with HEC, we've begun doing that around workforce. With DHS, I mean, even who else, just the Title 20 funding, we get a little bit of that, but I'm imagine that there could be, there's a phrase that I liked. It was like constructive duplication, which sounded like a nice softening of something that's often negative, which is we have organizations that are seeking funds from different sources to try to do their overall body of work, and no one agency can actually pay for all of it, or they can't get all of it in one place. But that doesn't mean that they should have to do 5 different reports. So that is an interesting thing to discuss or think about or capture for the plan for next time. I like the idea, yeah, driving towards some common outcomes and outputs among agencies is an interesting one. Well, out of respect for everyone's time, I suppose we may need to capture some of this and continue the conversation in a couple of weeks. I see stuff popping up in the chat. I'm going to open the floor back up to anyone else who wants to say anything before we wrap. I see your comment there, Anna. That's great.
I'll also say I liked the categories you had on one of those earlier slides for ways to prioritize, and I'll just put in other ideas for you to consider depending how many sorting mechanisms you want or ways you want to language what it is to prioritize, right? Like youth voice and resilience might be hard to categorize, but you might say like deepest direct youth impact. So just considering for some consideration on the next discussion.
No, that's helpful. Thanks for putting that in there. Thanks everybody for your comments, for being here. We really appreciate it. I think with that, we can adjourn. Melissa, you can stop the recording. Abe, I think we have a meeting right now, but let's take 5 and then come back.